Yes, so I'm going to continue on Andersonian historical format. What I call Anderson's history style. Yeah, so of course, there's a lot of discussion on what is psychoanalysis, and psychoanalysis commences with Sigmund Freud in the 1910s and 1920s, in fact, who started a discourse called psychoanalysis, which is still not fully formed. He just claimed that there were patients and analysts who could analyze the patient's problems of psychology, it seemed, but also deep perturbations of what he called neurosis, hysteria, and also obsessive neurosis, and other such compulsive disorders. He thought was the condition of humankind in general. And then, of course, women are considered perpetually hysterical, so in perpetual crisis. And this began the discourse of Freud, which became institutionalized only after the 20th century, the 1950s and 60s with Lacan, which created a symbolic topos of language into it and became institutionalized, of course, without finding a symbolic cure, by which he meant no cure for the symbolic topos of the unconscious, which he thought was relevant. There was a linguistic topos given to the patient's condition and its contours, and felt that there was no cure possible. By the end of his institutionalization in 1950-60, by 80, he was completely sure that there can be no symbolic cure. And this, of course, led to the 1990s and 2000s spent with Schurztheory. Of course, by 2020, he's fully institutionalized just recently. He captures the whole thing as what he calls Fanon's psychoanalysis in Algeria for a brief period, 1955 to 60, in fact, which claims that social violence is the conditions of psychotic symptoms, and each of these Freudian conditions are, of course, philosophical horizons of how to interpret people only. And then there is, of course, cultural analysis possible and institutional analysis possible, which will then mediate one to one's culture and one's historical conditions and also economic conditions. He thinks the peso conditions of Argentina mixed with depression economics in its past and its history, and also its lack of cohesion with the world in sense of being depleted from the world also creates a condition of depression in general and can create a psychotic problem among patients of Argentina, which he then transfers to Spain as also suffering from a dictatorship era history mediated by recent freedoms and also austerity culture, which creates depression and stasis, which can have a problem in the patients. And then, of course, he thinks similar things can happen in India, where the symbolic is so advanced that it drops out the leftists who are considered outside history, and so it can create conditions of lagging from history in India's case. And then, of course, he diagnoses every one of these conditions of society and social order, which he calls symbolic or social symbolic, by which he means symbolic order exists in society for psychoanalysis. And this is linked to the analysis of also America. Finally, it's going through a history of war, and so its institutions, like military institutions, might have such problems imbibed from the 20th century or recent Arab war, which he thinks is also a general condition of anyone in the Zionist Israel who's going through conditions of Arab war, which is recently liberated by news and more and more news pouring in the entire world that the left has in fact won, and the Arab world has been liberated into a complete democracy, and even Arab justice has been talked about, so to liberate the Arab people from their conditions of extreme violence, and all of this has been understood with certain tips that he gives, for example, for abstract time, for the rituals of professional life and daily life in a certain abstract fashion. Also introduce things like his common tips would be to introduce better socializing, better ways of communicating on the phone. The phone is necessary, he adds, and then, of course, communicating on the phone linked to a better lifestyle and an abstract time following, which also leads to other tips he gives, like, for example, having your medical health covered well by a financial doctor, financially viable doctor, a great doctor. And then he also adds other tips, like, for example, how one can just listen to music is also considered therapeutic, and not therapy, but it's also the beauty of privileged status of music in jazz, which helps black people in America entering modern equality and modern capitalism, he says, and it's at an equal level only with slavery, when he says jazz frees you, and Marxism in that sense and Surrealism in that sense frees you. Of course, intellectual fascism then characterized English Marxism, along with French intellectual culture, along with the recent Slow turn in India, all of which will create an intellectual formation which helps you become genius, he thinks, at some level, which liberates you from the social oppression of the world and analyzes it conflictually to create a liberation in the person. All this I call a brief history of psychoanalysis. Of course, Shansu is currently institutionalized as the most successful psychoanalyst, is going through that kind of crisis of symbolic investiture, mediated by violence accumulated throughout his career, and is called reflux condition in medical terms, which he also uses. Anyway, thank you. That's all.